Welcome everyone to the Week 9 Waiver Wire Show presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host as always, Josh Larky. Joined as always by my Taylor Swift wig. Happy Halloween, everyone. Also joined by my co-host, Ryan Reynolds. We'll be going over the top ads of the week, other interesting speculative ads, along with quarterback, tight end, and defensive streamers to get you all set up for Week 9. Ryan, let's dive into your guy, Trey McBride at tight end. He's our top ad of the week. This season, he's now been targeted on 28% of his routes. That's a top 5 mark. It's similar to Kyle Pitts last year when everyone was like, oh, Kyle Pitts per route is so awesome. Well, you know what? We're getting that with Trey McBride. He's got good speed. He's getting Kyler Murray back this week or next week. In his first game without Zach Ertz in week 8, 39% target share, leading the team with 14 targets. He caught 10 of them for 95 yards and a touchdown. The touchdown was no fluke. That's what happens when 3 of your 14 targets are in the red zone and 1 of them comes in the end zone. Ryan, let's hear the accent and any other thoughts on Trey McBride.
Trey McBride, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I've been talking about this all year since opening day. We're going to get to a point in the waiver wire marathon here where you're not going to be able to get a tight end that gets more than 4 targets a week. This is the last one. I think this is the last guy you can plug into your lineups if you're soft at tight end. I'd get a little aggressive on him if you're weak at the position with McBride.
Yeah, I think you can go 20, 30, maybe even 40% if your team looks pretty stacked outside of tight end. Yeah. Folks, Ryan Reynolds is Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. His power rankings came out today on the 33team.com. Make sure you check those out and make sure you stay till the end of the show. Ryan also has a Halloween costume to reveal. Kyler Murray, I'm going to say it just like you said it with McBride. Kind of feels like the last gift we're getting at the position where you actually get a very strong starter in one quarterback leagues with Kyler Murray potentially. I think the only quarterbacks that he can't reach in fantasy football this year would be Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, maybe Lamar Jackson as well. But I think he could be in the Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Fields tier. I almost feel like the loss of Kirk Cousins to the Achilles injury makes Kyler Murray more valuable since we just lost a bona fide top 8 fantasy quarterback. Kind of feel like Kyler can slot in there. Deshaun Watson's been disappointing. Matthew Stafford has the hurt thumb, and he's taken a step back in the last couple weeks. Any other thoughts here on Murray, where it looks like you're getting pretty much a guaranteed top 12 quarterback, even if he doesn't run much?
Yeah, how I'm treating him on a team with Justin Herbert, actually, where I'm 7-1. Is that I got Murray a couple weeks ago. Once I saw that the ceiling of the Chargers offense dipped a little bit. Herbert's kind of still a guy you can plug and play every week, but Murray's a guy, one of the few guys that I'm willing to play over him in certain matchups. So again, I'm not someone that just rides with one quarterback unless I have one of the true top guys. I think Murray's a guy can be your stability at the position while you stream in certain matchups.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the hair flip running back committee of the week. A lot of people are trying to flip-flop and decide if they want Darrell Henderson or Royce Freeman. I think we both lean that Darrell Henderson will be the 1A, Freeman the 1B, until Kyren Williams returns off of IR 3-4 weeks from now. Both games that they overlapped, Henderson led the team in carries. Both those games, Henderson was more productive in the pass game by a lot. Last week, Royce Freeman did get the goal line carry. He did run slightly more routes, but Henderson's the one who had 3 catches for 54 yards. Freeman did not catch any passes. Have to think Henderson is a little more involved this upcoming week in the pass game. A little bit concerning with Matthew Stafford, whether or not he's going to play. He has the sprain in his right thumb, I believe. I think if Stafford plays, Henderson's a low-end fantasy running back too. Freeman's kind of a flex. I think if Stafford's out, Henderson, very squeaky running back 3 in fantasy, and Freeman's unplayable. I actually, in some ways, think Henderson has a higher pass game ceiling if Stafford plays this week than normal, just because he might not want to take as much contact. He might be a little bit more sensitive. And just if your throwing hand has a hurt finger, you're probably not going to be able to push the ball as effectively downfield. Any other things to add here on this flip-flop committee of the week?
Yeah, I'm not overly enthusiastic about either of them unless you're just in dire straits at running back 2. But, to that end, our guy Nick Boniford, who is, he was on Kyren Williams last year. He's more bullish on this backfield situation than us. He actually likes Royce Freeman more than both of us, I'd say, specifically. So I'm if you're in dire straits, they're fine. But I'm not really like overly enthusiastic about either option, especially like you said, if Stafford misses time, like this offense is going to be. We're talking a bottom 5 offense in the league without Stafford.
I mean, we saw it last year.
Yeah.
The Rams, if I remember correctly, scored the fewest points in the NFC last season because they had half a season without Matthew Stafford. Let's talk about Zach Charbonnet of the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker was banged up last week. He had a calf injury. That might have factored in, but still, Zach Charbonnet has round 2 draft capital. He's competent in all phases. He outsnapped Kenneth Walker this past week. Walker had 8 carries to Charbonnet's 5. Both were incredibly efficient on the ground, but Charbonnet had twice as many routes run, and he caught 2 passes for 11 yards, while Walker only caught 1 pass for 4 yards. I'm not going to read into it too much because it's 1 week. I'm not saying to start Zach Charbonnet this week either, but they also split the red zone carries 1 apiece. Charbonnet is an incredibly high upside stash rest of season. And if this usage continues, you might be able to flex him depending on the matchup. Ryan, you're a Kenneth Walker guy. Did he look a little banged up in that game to you?
I wouldn't quite say that, but just the way Pete Carroll's talked about things this week, it's a little encouraging for Charbonnet. And in general, I love, I go out of my way to get these guys whenever they're available, especially in home leagues. Premium stash, like you said, with some ascending standalone value, where if Walker has any kind of injury setback, you're talking about a guy you plug and play every week in Charbonnet. So, of all the guys on this list, if I need a tight end, I want McBride. If I don't, Charbonnet is the guy I want most out of everyone.
Yeah, I think if for some reason he's on waivers, I'd bid 25, 30% and just get him.
Yeah.
We'll actually talk about Charbonnet more on Thursday. We'll be doing part 2 of the collaborative series with Player Profiler, my old stomping ground. It'll be Ryan and I, and Player Profiler analyst to be announced, a pretty big name. Looking forward to that one. That'll be on Thursday. Last week, Ryan and I teamed up with Theo Greminger to talk about the young quarterbacks in the NFL. So we'll hit the rookie running backs and just kind of talk about what we've seen, rest of career outlooks for them in Dynasty, and if we have any other redraft thoughts on them. Speaking of running backs, Leonard Fournette just signed with the Buffalo Bills. Capable everywhere, can pass block, he can catch passes. Tom Brady loved him the final few seasons of his career. Tom Brady definitely knows ball. I think Fournette can also get some goal line work. If I had James Cook, Latavius Murray, I'd be a little concerned, especially for Latavius Murray. They're kind of redundant assets where it's 2 veterans that are kind of competent everywhere. I think Fournette just gets a slight experience edge in some ways, but I think that's kind of the main one to look at. And then for James Cook, I think it just further nukes any hope for touchdown upside with him now that there's not 1, but 2 big veteran bodies in this backfield. Anything to add here on Fournette to the Bills?
I found that it to be strange that it's taken this long in general. I mean, I thought he should have been with Cincinnati entering the year. That would have made sense. I'm not super enthusiastic about his standalone fantasy value right now. I think that's a crowded backfield currently, but like you said, he's probably a threat to Latavius Murray over the next few weeks. He does have passing game value, and he's more reliable than James Cook. So down the stretch, perhaps, Leonard Fournette's at least worth stashing and seeing what happens over the next month.
Let's turn to some other additions we're a little less enthusiastic about, but are good stashes. Before we do, though, reminder, Ryan's power rankings are up on the site, the33rdteam.com. They're free to view. He gives you, obviously, all 32 teams ranked, but also a paragraph for each team, some context as to what they've done recently, what their upcoming schedule might look like. They are truly the industry standard at this point, and I think anyone that reads through those would be inclined to agree. And then on Thursday, you'll get his expert picks and predictions for every single game. And if you want more personalized waiver wire attention, hop into our free Discord. It's linked in our articles on the site. It's linked in Ryan's Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL and my Twitter at JLarky Tweets. Sorry about Rashid Shaheed. We talked about him a little bit yesterday on our recap fantasy and betting show. He ran fewer routes than Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, and Juwan Johnson. Yet he caught 3 passes for 153 yards and a touchdown, just a 10% target share. The way that I'm treating him is that he's a flex option this week against Chicago. Quarterbacks against Chicago have averaged 270 passing yards a game. Running backs against Chicago have averaged just 3.3 yards per carry. The Bears also just added Montez Sweat. He hasn't been great this year, but it just still fortifying the defensive line a little bit more. They're at this point, I think the Bears are kind of the sneaky kind of extreme pass funnel defense in the NFL when you look at the stats. So Shaheed for me, when my fantasy rankings hit the site later today, he will be a flex type in those rankings. Not quite sure how many other matchups I'd be excited to start him. Floor is low. Anything to add here about if you think they might increase his usage at any point this year?
No, I think he's a guy where you have to pinpoint when he's going to get a 50-yard reception. I do think it's possible against Chicago, especially if they trade Jalen Johnson this week, or if Eddie Jackson misses time again, or if Brisker misses time again. At full strength, the Bears secondary is actually fine, but hasn't been at full strength really all year. So I don't have a ton of interest in Shaheed, but he does have more upside than normal this week.
Let's talk about Demario Douglas. That might be a new name to some people. He is a wide receiver on the Patriots. Kendrick Bourne tore his ACL. Very unfortunate. He was having a career year. He's now out for the season. Demario Douglas has target shares of at least 20% the past 2 weeks. Super, super low average depth of target. I think rest of season we might get the poor man's Wan'Dale Robinson type. Some PPR viability, that's about it. He's been targeted on a high percentage of his routes. I'm inclined to think that drops a little bit with more regular playing time, with defenses keying in on him a little bit more. I don't have too much to say about him. I think you and I are pretty unenthusiastic, but I know a lot of people are asking, so we had to mention him. Anything to add there on Mr. Demario Douglas?
Yeah, if your team, in deep super flex leagues, maybe. Otherwise, like in a traditional like home league, for instance, I don't have any interest in Douglas.
Same here. Let's talk about Quentin Johnston. I don't think we should get too excited about him yet, but last week was encouraging. He had 6 targets. That was a career high by a lot. That's a 16% target share, which is good, not great. It's actually kind of viable each week if you can consistently get that in the Chargers' pass-heavy offense. He caught 5 of those 6 targets for 50 yards. His average depth of target was 8 yards, which is a little lower than it had been, which was kind of nice, actually, because it meant he wasn't just running go routes and being a decoy. Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler out-targeted him. I think every single week we should expect at least one, if not both of them, to out-target him. Josh Palmer also was hurt coming into the game and then re-hurt his knee during the game. He played most of the routes anyway. He didn't miss much time, but I think that factored into Johnston having the big game where he had 5 catches for 50 yards. I'm not starting him this week. They face the Jets on Monday night. But I think if he has another game like this on Monday night, then we can start to talk about whether or not we start him. I wouldn't want to go more than about 10% fab, even though it's a round 1 rookie receiver, just because it's been so discouraging to this point.
Yeah, I'm with it too. You stash him first round draft pick on the Chargers. There's opportunities there, but he's just been very underwhelming. And if you ask me the question, Ryan, what does Quentin Johnston do well? My answer right now is he's just a guy. That's what he looks like. So he's not someone that they need to get the ball to more. He hasn't shown any of that. Where Rashee Rice for the Chiefs, on the other hand, I've seen it with him. I have not seen it with Johnston yet.
I would agree there. Let's turn to someone that I think we've seen a little bit more from, actually. Worse offense, better showing so far through his rookie year, Jonathan Mingo. At least 5 targets in 5 of his 6 games this year. He just came off a career-high 62 receiving yards in Week 8. With Jonathan Mingo, you're betting on a rookie receiver with early round 2 draft capital, plus a rookie quarterback in Bryce Young, who might improve as the season moves along. That is all rosy. The downside, Mingo hasn't done anything yet, and he plays on the Panthers, not an offense we love. I'll put it this way. Adam Thielen's 33, lengthy injury history. If Thielen goes down, I think Mingo becomes an every week fantasy top 30 type option. That's about as excited as I can get about him. But in deep leagues, I think you can bid 5% of your fab and probably get him, and I think you'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting stash. Same kind of scenario as what I'm looking at. You've talked about this many times. Rookie wide receivers can be a cheat code late in the season. If he's going to ascend, it's going to be late. It's going to be during money-making season. I'm interested in stashing anyone that I think that about. Jalen Hyatt's another guy. Yes. I have Mingo on a few teams for the same reason.
Let's talk about Will Levis. Will Levis, the Titans quarterback. I think he's going to be their quarterback rest of season after what we saw this past week. He's got a strong arm. He's got a little mobility. We should never expect 4 touchdowns in a game from him. That could end up actually being his career high, depending on how his career goes. I actually think if I had to bet right now, I think at a 50-50 odds, I'd take that he never throws for 4 touchdowns in a game again. Though it was his first NFL start. That's impressive. However, I wrote up a big thread on Twitter that at this point's gone kind of viral about how some of the film disagreed with the actual stats. He had a lot of inaccurate throws. The touchdowns to Hopkins, a lot of them were just kind of horrible defensive plays from the Falcons, which is surprising because the pass defense had been pretty good. It's all very, very weird. I'm thinking he's kind of a matchups-based streamer rest of season where I actually wouldn't be starting him, and I'm not ranking him as a viable starter this week on Thursday night against the Steelers. But I think there's a non-zero chance he can put up top 12 numbers rest of season because he's a rookie with a big arm and some speed. Ryan, I watched the tape, but you watched the tape on not just Will Levis, but every snap of every game since 2014. You have a much bigger mental database than I do here. How did Levis's first start fit into other rookie quarterbacks' first starts? Because I think that's ultimately what people want is we understand it's deceiving the touchdowns, but at the end of the day, were there flashes of promise?
Yeah, it reminded me a bit of Daniel Jones against the Buccaneers years ago, where with less rushing upside. I remember I wrote immediately after that, like, let's not overreact to this. This is you're talking about one of the worst defenses in the league. Daniel Jones chewed him up. Where in this outing, I wouldn't call the Falcons one of the worst defenses in the league, but like you said, Hopkins won a 50-50 ball for a touchdown. I think a lot of the long scores were a bit unsustainable. I definitely wouldn't play him against a premium pass rush like the Steelers because the liability of the Titans offense is their offensive line. So I'm with you on that. I do like his skill set for fantasy purposes. Big arm, little bit of rushing upside, but I'm only playing him against teams that have below average pass rushers in most scenarios.
Guys, nobody talks about football like Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter/X. All of his content's on the33rdteam.com. Make sure you check it out. And let's keep the quarterback conversation going. We talked about how we're not really starting Levis this week, but here's some quarterbacks we might be willing to start this week if needed. I'm actually very excited about Derek Carr facing the Bears. We mentioned before, Bears pass funnel defense. Carr, to his credits, had at least 300 passing yards in 3 straight games. Touchdown regression finally hit him. He had 2 passing touchdowns. He had over 20 fantasy points this past week. I think we could see another performance like that. I think with Carr, you're getting 16 to 22 fantasy points. It's a pretty narrow band, but I think the actual floor here is quite high. And when my rankings hit the site later today, you'll see one of the worst weeks I can remember in terms of fantasy depth at every position. So Carr is firmly in the top 12. Love the matchup, and I think he'll do just enough. Anything to add here with how he's looked?
He's had 300 yards passing in 3 games in a row, but last week, touchdown regression. That's the thing with Carr. He's probably going to throw for 250 plus this week. I'll look for him in props. I'll consider taking his over in props depending on where his line's at. Touchdowns really has been the problem with the Saints offense all year. Bears are a good matchup for everyone on New Orleans, so I lean towards Carr being my favorite streamer as well.
Before we get to our next streamer, folks, reminder that Ryan's Halloween costume is coming up at the end of the show. My fantasy rankings hit the site this afternoon. Ryan's power rankings are already up there. My rest of season fantasy rankings and trade chart will hit the site tomorrow. Those become increasingly important because most trade deadlines are week 11 or 12 in your fantasy leagues. Gardner Minshew travels to Carolina to face the Panthers. He's had 3 games since the Richardson injury. He's had 15, 16, 34 fantasy points. That's a pretty good floor. That's a nice ceiling. Panthers defense actually played really well in week 8, but they'd struggled mightily before that. So maybe they've turned a new leaf after their week 7 bye. I would have been more excited to start Minshew this week if the Panthers didn't look quite as good as they did this past week. Is that kind of where you're at this point, where I think Minshew, you can start him, but I'm suddenly not super enthusiastic about this streaming option?
I love Gardner Minshew. What they've done in Indianapolis offensively this year has been, one of the biggest surprises of the year. One of the things that I think's impressed me the most, actually, on both in the ground and in the air. But yeah, I don't view the Panthers as a slam dunk matchup. I do like Minshew. I'd rather play Carr. I think that's safer, where they have similar upside too.
And our final streamer of the week, hold your nose, flip the hair. Zach Wilson faces the Chargers. I see Ryan shaking his head in disgust. He hates my show sheet. Quarterbacks against my Los Angeles Chargers have averaged an NFL high 321 passing yards a game, but they just held Badgett to 232 passing yards. They just held him to 6 yards per attempt. He didn't throw a touchdown pass. He had 2 interceptions. He did have a rushing touchdown, but still, even with a rushing touchdown, Badgett had just 13 fantasy points. With Zach Wilson, you're hoping for 15 to 17 fantasy points, but I think you should expect to get kind of like Badgett, 12, 13, 14 points in this matchup. Anything to add here for our hold your nose streamer of the week?
Yeah, I mean, I think my problem with Zach Wilson is Gardner Minshew and Sam Howell are not only better than him, but they're a lot better than him. The Jets would be a really dangerous team with either of those quarterbacks. So I have absolutely zero confidence in him currently. That said, it's real thin with streaming options that are actually available on waiver wire. So you might be in a position where you have to play Zach Wilson against the Chargers.
You might, and you actually just inspired me. Ryan, I've got a good fit for you. Jacoby Brissett on the Jets. The Commanders just traded Montez Sweat to the Bears for a second-round pick, which, I mean, great job by the Commanders there when you're giving up half a season of what's been a good, not great pass rusher, and they're going to have to pay him now. But, yeah, I think that would be a nice fit. Brissett on the Jets, what we saw last year with the Browns, you give them a – yeah, I think they're winning 10 games if Brissett's there.
Gives you at least a bit more of a ceiling on offense, that's for sure. I think Brissett belongs back in Cleveland, though, personally.
Yes, I think we're all hoping that he can get some more playing time this year, given the cornucopia of terrible quarterback options playing right now. Sorry, I've got some of my natural locks in my mouth. That's pretty gross. Let's talk about our tight end streamer of the week. It's Hunter Henry. He faces the Commanders. Kendrick Bourne tore his ACL, as we mentioned. Devontae Parker's in concussion protocol. Juju Smith-Schuster stinks. The floor for Hunter Henry's low, like it is for almost every tight end. But the Commanders have allowed over 270 passing yards a game at nearly 8 yards a pass attempt. The Commanders have simply just been a mess on defense. The bright spots of this team, in many ways, have actually been the offense at times, which is so crazy. When they're trading players away at this point in the season, I think they're throwing the towel in many ways. And I think this is just simply a target consolidation play. I have Hunter Henry as a top 12 tight end this week. And I think if he's on waivers, there is your streamer. Anything to add to one of the less exciting streamers of the week?
Yeah, it's not exciting, but I get it. Volume could be good. And again, Washington's defense has to be one of the most underwhelming, underachieving units of the whole league so far this year. Because like you said, the offense has actually been pretty good. You know, they scored 30-something points against it. I think they scored 31 points against the Eagles twice. You should, sign up for that every week. So yeah, I want to target just about anyone against the Commanders defense at this point.
Let's now turn to defensive streamers. Before we rapid fire through this and show off Ryan's sneaky Halloween costume, reminder to check out our work on the 33rdteam.com. You checking out, consuming our articles, consuming podcasts like this when they hit the Spotify and Apple podcast feeds. It's currently the 33rd Team Podcast Network is what you should be searching. All that helps us keep this type of content free for the good people. Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter. His power rankings hit the site today. His expert picks and predictions for every game hit the site on Thursday. Defensive streamers. Ryan, we like the Falcons. Massive bounce back spot. Struggled against Levis. I like to think their chances against the Kirk Cousins-less Vikings should be even better. Talk to me about how you see this game playing out.
I mean, this is primarily just a bet against Jaron Hall. This is not a guy who should have been expected to see any notable playing time this year. Now he's thrust in a starting role. Even if they get Jameis Winston this week, Minnesota, I have to still think that Winston's going to start next week potentially. So it's ultimately a bet against the Vikings quarterback situation with Atlanta.
Yeah, I actually think in some ways there's more fantasy point upside for the Falcons defense if Winston, without knowing the playbook, just gets thrown in there.
Yeah.
From what we've seen, whereas Jaron Hall, I think, you're gonna get some good fantasy points from the Falcons defense, but I actually think the game plan will be so conservative that it doesn't actually lend itself to a lot of interceptions.
True.
Packers defense, they get the Rams. We love this. Should Matthew Stafford miss this game? I assume you only have interest if Stafford misses, but correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, only if he misses. If it's Brett Rippin, I want to bet against him in whatever way that I can.
Why should we be comfortable streaming the Texans facing the Buccaneers?
If you've watched any of our shows, you know I'm not a big Baker Mayfield guy. So ultimately, the Texans have been a good defense this year. Buccaneers have an unreliable offensive line outside of Tristan Wirfs. And Baker Mayfield's a guy where, for the most part, he's been tasked with carrying an NFL offense, and he's just not really equipped to do that.
All right, folks, we've got one more defensive streaming matchup. We have the Raiders defense and Max Crosby. They will be facing Ryan's New York Football Giants. Ryan, let me get your thoughts on this game.
This is how I feel about the New York Giants, Josh.
Folks, it's too painful for Ryan to talk about this game. He passed me some notes. Tommy DeVito was forced into emergency quarterback duty last week for the Giants. He totaled -1 passing yards through 3 quarters. If he plays, Max Crosby may just shut the Giants out on his own. Daniel Jones, there's now some optimism in quotes that he plays. He still has the neck injury. He's a very pressure-sensitive quarterback with one of the worst offensive lines in football in the Giants. I would not be surprised if this game is just completely wrecked by the Raiders' defensive front. From myself, from Taylor Swift, from the Wig, from the 33rd team, from Ryan Reynolds, from the bag on his head, this is the Waiver Wire Show. Thank you, everyone, and happy Halloween.